The world's population is currently 7.5 billion. But if you map out the growth rate for human population in the world over time, we can see that the population has grown exponentially. It took people at least 10,000 years, depending on when you start counting, to reach 1 billion people, and this happened in around 1850. To reach 2 billion, it took 75 more years. To reach 3 billion, it took 37 more years. To reach 4 billion, it took 15 more years, and to reach 5 billion, it took 12. This statistic shows the obviously exponential nature of population growth. In the late 1800s, the population growth rate had a huge spike up, and so did the population. Among various reasons for this, it has been posited that in the late 1800s the Industrial Revolution was happening, and this meant that medical and technological advances happened, improving the quality of living and allowing more kids to survive past early childhood. While it's clearly a morally good thing that more children can live, it also raises the question, will the population continue to grow, and if so, will we run out of space on the planet? Population growth for a species has always been graphed on a sigmoid or S-shaped curve, which has three phases: the slow growth phase, the rapid growth phase, and the third phase in which population will either decline, level off, or crash. Humans are currently in the rapid growth phase, and no other species on the planet has ever remained on that phase as long as we have. This part of the graph is worrying, as if humans continue to grow, we may reach an issue of overpopulation. Overpopulation is an abstract idea, as we don't have an exact number of humans required for it. However, to qualify for overpopulation, a country must have exhausted all available resources or space, and for various reasons, which we will come back to, the survivability for people in the future will be much higher without overpopulation. Therefore, it's a significant issue.
The next important part is what specifically about overpopulation is problematic, and in what ways. Much of the consternation comes from humanity's high consumption rate of the finite resources of the earth, as well as global perspectives on the value of fertility. Historically speaking, having a larger population was usually an asset. Far from reaching a lack of resources, more people meant more subjects to tax, and a larger community to draw on for the army. Most globally have surpassed the utility of these increased numbers long ago. Though Cobb cites the possibility for large-scale behavioral change as a possible remedy for putting pressures on the environment, such as becoming a vegetarian en masse concerning the issue of food, he makes it clear that even with a margin of error, the tendency for humans is to overconsume. Indeed, as large as it is, there is only so much land on the planet for people to inhabit, and we have already reached our carrying capacity in many ways. Even with advancing technology, there is only so much food one can harvest from a given plot of land. That is, of course, assuming that we use all of the land for production or human population. This would also mean the destruction of countless ecosystems and millions of acres of natural land, tamed to make way for likely destitute populations. It's worth noting that Cobb makes room for ambiguity on this particular issue, citing policy and land distribution as perhaps more salient factors than sheer overpopulation. He gives the increased pressures by the entrepreneuring dispossessed on the frontiers of the Brazilian rainforest as an example. Nevertheless, this eventuality, besides being a dead end, unfeasible economically and many times physically, would make a wasteland world environmentally, and would wreak havoc on the environment and atmosphere with the destruction of trees. It would make the lives of those multitude who were so privileged to live, instead of being more thoughtfully brought into the world, that much more miserable. As Hugh MacDonald puts it, getting away from it all, from urban stress and crowds, will be a thing of the past for the densely packed inhabitants of choked cities. Of course, this view of overpopulation sort of implies its equal distribution on the globe, where everyone is simultaneously expanding into new untouched territories at the same rates. This, of course, is not the case. The fact that overpopulation correlates with political boundaries is a significant part of the problem. Obviously, the world is not one communist state conglomerate that shares its resources equally among its constituents, and as such, For many developing countries, the matter of limited resources is particularly salient as they are by far the fastest growing countries by population. Aside from the destruction of the environment, which to some might have less immediacy, there is a clear economic argument for why poorer countries would benefit from some population control. There, the populations are high relative to land area and resources, and the economy and welfare system isn't strong enough to support such a population, which in turn leads to more poverty, a poverty that often fails to include reliable access to contraception, perpetuating the cycle. In regards to the aforementioned environmental concerns, it isn't simply a matter of using up resources. Rather, human consumption has dire side effects, including, among other things, the lion's share of blame for global warming. The ways in which we consume things, i.e. sustainably versus using fossil fuels et al., are obviously important, but at a broader level, we would be polluting so much less if there weren't so many of us. China, the world's top polluter, has questionable environmental practices, but it certainly doesn't help that they are also the most populous country on the planet. If one goes down the rabbit hole of global warming, there are numerous horrible and often simultaneous outcomes that would likely happen, such as dramatic sea level rise, the disruption of fragile or even not so fragile ecosystems by way of the rapidly changing climate, and potential mass displacement of humans from areas that become untenable to live in any longer, all of which means bad news for humans.
There are a wide range of factors affecting population growth, and therefore a number of ways to potentially control the global population. However, because few countries have actually attempted to reduce their birth rates, there is little concrete evidence for how well different population control policies would work and be received. The most widely known attempt by a country to reduce its birth rate is China's one-child policy, which was implemented in the 1980s and became national law in 2001. Policymakers in China began to worry about population growth in the 1970s, when census results showed that China's population would soon reach 1 billion if the growth rate of the previous decade continued. Concerns that the rapid growth rate would limit future economic gains led to a campaign that from 1973 to 1979 advocated later marriage, more time between births, fewer births per couple, and increased access to birth control. The result was that the national birth rate dropped from around 6 in 1970 to only 2.8 by the end of the decade. The one-child policy was first drafted in 1978 as an attempt to further control population growth. Although enforced only by local and provincial governments until 2001, it appeared to have the desired effect. China's population reached replacement level, the point at which the birth rate and mortality rate match, in the early 1990s, and the birth rate in 2005 was only 1.98 in rural areas and 1.22 in urban areas. Due to population momentum, the population at that point still increased by 0.6% annually, but was projected to begin to decrease around 2030. However, while it appears that the goal of policymakers in instituting the one-child policy had been achieved, it is unclear how large of a role the policy actually played in bringing about these changes. The birth rate had already dropped significantly by 1978, and although it continued to decrease, it did so at a slower rate. There was also significant backlash against the policy. It aroused international controversy, and at least up until 2005 was a key reason the U.S. limited its contributions to the United Nations Population Fund. Although it was met with ambivalence in urban parts of China where the birth rate was already close to 1, there was resistance in rural areas, where families, especially those whose first child was female, wanted to be able to have more children. Although the impact on population growth is unclear, the one-child policy had numerous social consequences. One of these was that it created an aging population, with fewer people of working age who had to support both the larger older generation as well as their children. Another effect was that it led to a significant gender gap in the population. Since parents could only have one child and many wanted a son, some couples would decide to have an abortion if they knew they were going to have a girl or offer their daughters for adoption. The subsequent gender imbalance led to tensions on the personal and family level, as there were millions of men who wanted to get married but had little hope of finding a wife. Given the social consequences and unclear impact on population of China's one-child policy, as well as the international backlash it has received, we do not think it would be an effective strategy for the world as a whole in terms of reducing population growth.